I don't think AI makes any decisions. AI is a tool to get the data into a decision logic, but the human always makes the decision.
Organizations want speed and they want to scale, which AI can provide, but they still need human ownership when consequences of a decision are significant.
I don't believe AI has any judgment. AI does not have a soul, has no judgment. It's mechanical, right? It computes, right? Aircon helps freight forwarders know what they're committing to at the time of quote, right? So it's not just speed to quote. Obviously, speed matters, right? But it's really evaluating the providers, evaluating the resources that are available. So the freight forwarder knows what they are committing to at the time of quote. The value is what is unknown, right? So how many quote requests are you not responding to? How many, and why are you not winning? Are people benchmarking you and not giving you any business, and you just ignored it because you don't have time to do it? There's real power in the unknown.
What do you now know that you wish you had known when you were building Aircon?
What the actual problem was we were solving.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of The Founder's Instinct. I'm your host Shaheer Khan. Today's conversation is about what happens when someone who has spent years working inside industry decides that the way things are being done needs to change. Our guest began his career in freight operations, went on to lead and scale logistics businesses, and eventually founded Aircon, a company focused on helping freight operations making better operational decisions. We'll be discussing his journey from operator to founder, the lessons he learned while scaling and selling logistics companies, and decision-making without removing human accountability. It is my great pleasure to welcome Chris Condon, founder and CEO of Aircon. Thank you for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, and thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Chris, before we talk about your present and Aircon, I think it's important to know about your background. So could you take us through your journey from the beginning of your career to leading logistics companies and eventually founding Aircon?
Sure, absolutely. I started my career at a company called Tower Group as a summer job, unloading ocean containers. And it's funny because as I look back at my career, Rob Blackmore and Bill Goodgin, I remember being short-staffed, and they say, "Hey, well, can you drive a forklift?" And I said, "Well, I can drive a combine. I think I can figure out how to drive a forklift." So that's kind of how I started, and fell in love with just the industry in itself, right? So I went from there. I went down to Expeditors. Expeditors gave me the opportunity to really lead people. There was a time of from a promotion standpoint, and there was two other very capable gentlemen that were applying for a supervisor role to run a relatively large account. And the manager of the department said, "Chris, you got it because you answered people are the most important, right? It's not about just the metrics or the customer expectation. It's how do we affect people, affect change." So it's funny as you asked about how early journeys help us and us how we go forward. It's those moments that as I look back at my career has really shaped who I am today.
That's a really inspiring journey, especially because you built your understanding of the industry from the ground up rather than entering it only from a leadership or a technology perspective. And I also agree with the principle you follow about people. I always say this to anyone who asks me, business is not only about profit, revenue, it's also about the people. If the people are satisfied and they're happy, the business automatically starts taking off.
Yeah, that's
So
I think
I agree with that.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I learned Jimmy Iramuspi told me one time, he goes, "Chris, people do business with people, right? They don't do business with spreadsheets. They don't do business with a computer. They do business with people." And I think that's a very important lesson to keep in mind, that we measure on dollars, right? We measure on different KPIs on what is visible, right? Because that's money at the end of the day, money makes the world go round, right? We can't forget that why we're even doing the business in the first place.
Yeah. Chris, you first spent years understanding how the industry actually operates. And one of the major chapters in that journey was your time leading Tricon Logistics. And you led that company through significant growth and ultimately an acquisition. What did that chapter teach you about scaling a company while maintaining operational control and also strong culture?
Yeah, I think that season of my life is kind of interesting because I think what it taught me is that alignment of teams and expectations are important, and that's really kind of where I think language started to be a big part of how I articulate or look at. Here at Aircon, we call it lenses, right? So, what lens are you looking at the problem through, right? Are you looking at it from a customer's lens? Are you looking from a CFO financial lens? And that nuance, um, I think, started at Tricon when we knew what we were doing, right? Obviously, Aircon actually was the first idea of Aircon started at Tricon because I couldn't get into bids, right? So it taught me that rate is not the only factor, right? It's an input to part of the decision.
Yeah. I really appreciate that perspective because growth is often presented as entirely positive, and I'm sure the experience you had gave you a front row seat of both opportunities and the limitations within logistics operation.
Well,
So,
and it went through
yeah,
COVID, right? So COVID was a big disruptor back then, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, after spending so many years inside the freight industry, what did you believe needed to change in the way logistics companies made operational decisions?
I think the biggest obstacle for me, or not obstacle, the biggest aha moment for me was looking at what technology could do today versus what it has done in the past, right? And the separation of the two different workflows. Um, Again, rates and input, right? And
Yeah,
rates and the technology that we've had, or problems that we had 15, 20 years ago, is not the same challenges we have today. And that's kind of the biggest aha moment for me is like, okay, how do we separate the execution layer and how do we improve the promise to the buyer, right? Because
yeah,
at the end of the day, that's what a forwarder does, right? They're making a commitment to their buyer, and they know all the different providers of that commitment, right? So different freight forwarders, wholesalers, airlines, truckers, government, regulatory, all that stuff. The forwarder who's making the commitment to the buyer is the one that has the biggest burden of proof, right, or biggest burden of evidence.
yeah. And that is such an important distinction. And also, I think a company can have a huge amount of information available and still struggle to make a clear or timely decision. And that difference between having data and being able to act on it seems to be central to the problem. And this is also where operational background becomes especially important. So we've discussed the problem and the experience behind the company. Let's now bring Aircon itself into the conversation. And if you can explain it in practical terms for someone who is hearing about it the first time.
Sure, yeah. Aircon helps freight forwarders know what they're committing to at the time of quote, right? So it's not just speed to quote. Obviously, we speed matters, right? But it's really evaluating the providers, evaluating the resources that are available. So the freight forwarder knows what they are committing to at the time of quote. They still own the commitment. They still own the relationship with the buyer. We just help organize that in a manner that builds confidence in that quote.
Yeah. And if we talk about Aircon, how has your operational experience influenced the way you built Aircon? And you talked about the acquisition as well. How did that change your perspective on building Aircon?
Yeah. So when we sold Tricon back in 2020, um,
Yeah.
the thought process was pretty straightforward. We're going into COVID. Logistics companies are going to make a lot of money because obviously when there's disruption in supply chain, logistics really earn their stripes, right? They really
Oh,
it's about finding capacity, finding a solution, finding options, and that's really the main value that I see as a freight forwarder. Um, but what I also found is that the technologies that are happening are really protecting certain ecosystems, right, or workflows, right? So like
Yeah.
RMSs is a distribution of assets of the airlines, right? There's platforms for brokers for truckers and whatnot. There's security, all that this stuff. There's a ton of technology out there that is very important and extremely helpful today. But from an experience standpoint, I guess maybe from a challenge standpoint is we talk in execution levels, right? So use cases. We talk in what's the value that this creates from a use case or from a scenario.
Yeah.
The challenge with that is like, okay, well, how do we improve it, right? It's not just knowing the provider. It's when do we get the quote, and it's actually kind of funny to me because as I go to different conferences and I'm speaking at different conferences and whatnot, every freight forwarder gets unsolicited emails saying, "Hey, here's my rate from Hong Kong to London or London to Joburg," and those are all important signals, and those that signals don't always make it to the public rate sources, right? So, but it's data. And it's important data because it gives a benchmark and or a logic of what is that market actually at, right? Where is the market actually selling at? What are people actually buying at? And how much confidence do I have that this particular provider can fulfill my commitment to that I made to my client, right? Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, as we said, people do business with people, and as we've grown and we scaled um, as an industry, buyers of cargo have also changed, right? They've changed of like, well, it's safe. Like I know this brand, so like one of my favorite sayings is nobody gets fired for choosing FedEx, right? If there's an issue in logistics with FedEx, you're not going to get fired, but you may get fired for
Yeah.
the smaller guy that your boss doesn't know, but you trusted him, right, or trusted her, right, or the
Yeah.
brand. And that's been kind of that big learning moment, switching from Tricon, because I went from Expeditors to Tricon to now, and it's easy to sell a brand. Like I could sell, like when I was at Expeditors, right? Like they knew if I committed to something, the company would back me up, right? Because they had a good brand, right? But as you go to a brand that's unknown, now it's just a personal brand, right? It's your personal commitments and your personal relationships that we have with clients or buyers, right? And then it even becomes more important that you know who you're buying from and who's supporting that commitment.
Yeah. And I also want to ask, it's basically a general question. What assumptions about logistics do technology companies often get wrong?
Well, the big one is the rate is the only the biggest concern, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think that's probably the biggest issue is that if we only measure cost on a P&L, right, type stuff, we're not measuring the value of the next step, right? What is the
Yeah.
next step once that freight gets to a destination? What value is that cargo doing for that particular company or that particular identity, right? Those
Mm.
are the things that I think we get wrong. That and maybe not wrong is not the right word. That might be a little too harsh. But we don't calculate what are the other things that are important, right? Of
Mm.
on time delivery. If the cargo capacity gets a little tight, what airline's not going to bump my cargo, right? Versus this other forwarder or other IAC.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I think rates, right? Like rates again, they're everywhere, right? There's no shortage of knowledge of where rates come from. The value of the freight forwarder is knowing is what provider that's providing those rates I can trust.
Yeah. And is the main value speed, visibility, profitability, risk reduction, or all of those?
Well, so the that's an interesting question because I
Yeah.
originally thought that speed was the biggest driver, right? So when I first got into air freight, after leaving distribution in El Paso, we set up a quoting desk, right? And the quoting desk was the KPI was you need to respond within 30 minutes of a request. And we instantly saw growth, right? Like speed to quote matters, and in air freight, it's pretty well known in the industry. Like the first quote wins 40 to 60% more of the time.
Yeah.
And the logic behind that is that it's $20 to $50 difference in total cost, right? Stereotypically, right, from forwarder A to forwarder B, buying a rate, because
Yeah.
again, the rates are everywhere. But what I've come to the realization as the last, maybe last year or so, is that rate is again one input. Who's providing that rate is a second input, and then what is the real value is what does my customer expect, right? As
Yeah.
a freight forwarder, what does my customer expect? That hey, it gets there between, is rate more important? Is on time delivery more important? Is it getting it off the dock more important? So knowing your customer requirements and what they expect should change how the quote is structured.
Yeah.
Um, and then once that's done, that's where our system comes in and makes the routine, right? So once I'll give you an example: Dallas to London. There's lots of capacity. The rates are pretty stable. Quote comes into your system, you can quote it. And then if it's not stable, or if there is a something that is off in the quote request, then there's some logic that we built that what do we do, right? What do you want the system to do? Do you want it to elevate it to an operator to take a look at? So this might be like hazmat. We have some customers that don't want to automatically quote hazmat. We have some customers that do personal effects, right? So they have a different gating, if you will, on size or weight to the shipment. So all these things are important to understand and set up in the front, and then it allows your throughput to happen, right? And it allows the judgment of when the human needs to look at it, right? Hey, it's a battery, or hey, this is going to a destination that might be embargoed, or there's some questions around it from a geopolitical stuff, those type of things.
Yeah.
Raise it and make judgment where it's required, not on the routine.
That's great. And how do you make sure the technology fits naturally into the operator's day to day rather than creating additional work?
Yeah, that's be where the business happens, right? So in our case,
Yeah.
we similar like to CRM, we mirror or we digest the emails, because that global trade happens in emails, right? I mean, there's not one TMS, there's not one RMS, there's not one WMS. All these terms for different systems. Um, the communication with your client happens in emails, right? So
Yeah.
that's part of the value that we have, is that we have that, and we're 100% transparent. It's a forwarder's data, it's a forwarder's email. It can be extracted. You can validate against each other, because we believe that transparency and integrity are what's going to make us successful.
Yeah, that makes the value much more clearer. It's not simply about giving operators another tool, it's about helping them understand what is happening and act before a problem becomes an expense or difficult to manage. So, I think most companies do not suffer from a complete lack of data in many cases. They already have more information than their teams can realistically process. So, what separates genuinely useful operational intelligence from simply giving your teams more dashboards and alerts?
Yeah, yeah. So we don't actually give dashboards. It's kind of funny, as we had an internal discussion maybe 6-8 months ago. It's like, dashboards are dashboards. Why don't we just give them the data and then show them the tools on how to slice and dice it?
Yeah,
The biggest thing that we saw is that most most of our customers are realizing that their data isn't what they think it is, right? Particularly on the quote side of it, because it has to go from the email to their system, Excel spreadsheet, their TMS, whatever that is, and that they're reporting on what is known. The value is what is unknown, right? So how many quote requests are you not responding to? How many, and why are you not winning? Why are are people benchmarking you and not giving you any business, and you've just ignored it because you don't have time to do it? That
yeah,
there's real power in the unknown, right? And because of where the data that we are providing or sharing, or not sure what the exact word there is, what we're finding is that you actually, most customers have a demand much higher than they realize, right?
yeah,
And then what does that demand say? If you're not responding, the relationship never has a chance to grow, right? You never, like, I had one customer that I recommended to one of another customer. from a provider standpoint, it took them 4 days to respond, right? In air freight, if you're not responding minimum 24 hours, that shipment's gone,
Yeah.
right? But they don't know because it's not in the system, right? They don't have a way to track that today, and they don't have a benchmark from a network perspective.
Yeah. You talked about giving the data and sharing the information, but wouldn't that like make decision making slower? It could get overwhelming sometimes.
Well, so
Yeah.
the decision is already made, right? So the freight
Yeah.
forwarder already makes the decision on what they want to do on this particular request.
Okay.
Where the data becomes powerful is how do you improve the decision, right? Is it, hey, I have 100 requests comes in, I only won 10 of them. How do can I use this data to have a meaningful conversation with my client? Can I use this data to have a meaningful conversation with my provider? Can I use this data to have a meaningful conversation with my internal operations? Right?
Yeah.
Like, why are we quoting it this way? Why, like, all these things, again, on the unknown, the data's there. It's just a matter of utilizing it in a manner to what role is looking at it, right? From an operator, currently, it doesn't matter. The quote's done. They've already committed to it. They got to be the shock absorber, whatever constraint was missed upstream, right?
Yeah.
From a CFO standpoint or from a finance standpoint, it's like, hey, we're supposed to be at 20% margin, but on these 6 shipments brought us down to 15, right? Because we took a negative hit. Why is that? Right? Why did we book it this way? Why did all these types of questions? Now you can start answering with real data and real precision versus having it rolled up as a report saying, hey, I'm at 18% margin and I have a 16% win, sorry, a 16% win rate. We're good because that's industry standard. But what we're seeing is that the demand isn't being supported, which then means you're really not, you have an incomplete picture of how your business is being run. So from an owner operator, those type of lenses, how do I improve that? How do I improve my win rate? Is it a rate issue? It is a buying issue. All these things take into consideration, and these are the things that again, running an air freight department, running with the gateway, running with having the expertise on the buy side, and then having the expertise on a brand on the sell side, and bringing those two together is I don't know how people can do it. Like AI is really the unlock, right? To give us that ability to digest that information in real time.
Yeah.
That's the power. The power of AI is really to be able to do all these things at once, and then once it's booked, how good was the promise? How good was the quote? Right? The quote was booked on airline 123 using RMS ABC. Why didn't it not book that same way? Right. So again, you can make business decisions. That's the power.
Yeah. And you talked about AI. My next question was basically about AI. So, in your opinion, where should the boundary sit between AI supported decision making and human judgment?
I don't think AI makes any decisions.
Okay.
I think AI is a tool to get the data into a decision logic, but the human always makes the decision, right? So, and that's kind of the difference between automating or automation and a decision layer, right? So from a commitment layer that we sit in. So the automation is, how do I get this data, put it into the logic of the human that's already decided, if this happens, then do this.
Yeah.
AI just makes that faster, right? AI, particularly the LLM, right? Digest emails, get it into our commitment console that we built. What is your sources of data? What is your sources of truth? And then what do you want to commit to your client? And if it's outside of those guardrails, what do you want the system to do? Email to an operator, email it back to their client or buyer, or flag it as a concern, quote it with a flag saying, this is what I understood. Please confirm. In our case, the human's always in the loop because the human's always doing the booking. Right. So that's for our case, there's lots of other steps that have to happen at the booking process, right? Documentation, packing list, commercial invoice, denied parties, all these other things that have to happen to validate that the judgment of the quote was correct.
Okay. And AI isn't really just simply displaying the data, it's also providing with recommendations. So when an AI recommendation leads to a poor outcome, where should the accountability sit?
Always with the human. So again, in our case, we don't let the AI um, recommend per se.
Okay.
We let AI digest the data into what we've already, what the forwarder already decided, right? So if it's a quote less than 1,000 kilos going to Dallas to London, quote it on these sources, right? Because I trust this provider, I trust this rate source, quote it based on that. If it's outside of those guardrails, then the AI will again doesn't really recommend, but it takes that data, adds context to it, meaning this is why it wasn't quoted, right, or committed to, and then what operator needs that data information to make a judgment call. So this is where
Okay.
I don't mean to push back too hard on this, but I don't believe AI has any judgment. AI does not have a soul, like it does have has no judgment. It's a
Yeah.
it's mechanical, right? It computes, right? I tell my CTO, he kind of laughs at me all the time. I go, Dennis, it's just math. At the end
Exactly.
of the day,
Yeah.
it's just math. It's computing. It's turned letters and phrases and human communication into something that can be computed, right? Math.
Yeah. And I think organizations want speed and they want to scale, which AI can provide, but they still need human ownership when consequences of a decision are significant. So I agree with you there. And Chris, we're just around the end now, and I would like to bring it back to the founder journey. What I found interesting about your journey is that you did not begin as a technology founder looking for an industry. You began as an operator who understood the problem deeply and eventually decided to build something around it. So, looking back at your journey, what advice would you give to an experienced operator who sees a major industry problem but is uncertain whether to build company around it?
Keep asking questions on how and why. I think for me, as I talk, I've always surrounded myself with people smarter than me, right? And in certain areas, right? From particularly from a technology standpoint. In fact, this past week, we have our implementation manager. He has he's an engineer. He's a mechanical engineer, I believe, is his actual education. And it reminded me back when I was in Seattle and Tricon days, and our technology person, her name was Rosa, and I kept challenging her. I say, "Hey, Rosa, we need to do this. The system should be able to do this. It's 20, whatever year. It's 2019. We should be able to have the system do this." She goes, "Well, I know the system better than anybody else." Blah 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 blah. And the next morning she came in. She goes, "Chris, I figured it out. You're right. I can do this, and this. That will produce the outcome that we were looking at." And I've always noticed that I'm gonna a leader or a someone that manages process is we tend to look at what the expected outcome first, and then work backwards. At least that's how I've always done it, right? Like, okay, what is my desired outcome, and then what are the steps needed to take it from today to get there?
Yeah.
And as a founder, that has served me very well. But I'd also caution people to slow down enough to see where you're at today. And there's lots of paths to that destination.
Yeah. And what do you now know that you wish you had known when you were building Aircon?
What the actual problem was we were solving. We started off as a tech-enabled wholesaler, thinking that the execution was the problem.
Oh,
And we shifted right around when LLM came out back in 2022. So that's another note to founders is don't be afraid to pivot, right? But make sure that pivot is clear and understood by the team.
that is an excellent advice, especially for experienced operators who may understand a problem deeply but still hesitate because becoming a founder requires a very different type of responsibility and risk. So, Chris, this has been a really valuable conversation. your journey also shows that better decision making is not simply about producing more data. It is about helping people understand what matters and what action should be taken, and that the judgment should remain with the humans.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I thank you for commenting on that. I sometimes the being a founder is a lonely position.
Yeah, it is. And I really appreciate you joining me on the podcast and sharing your journey and insights with us. I wish you and the Aircon team continued success.
All right, thank you very much, and thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
And to everyone listening, thank you for tuning in to the Founders Instinct. Follow the podcast for more honest conversations with founders, CEOs, and operators about what it really takes to build, lead, and scale companies. Chris, thank you again.
Thanks, appreciate it.